Welcome to Tales from the Streets.
Here's what our narrator has to say. I had no premonition that day when I boarded a golf car, from Kaduna to Abuja. A few kilometers after Kaduna, shortly after the NYC camp, around Duse, on the express, we were assailed by a volley of gunfire targeted at tires of vehicles on the express. Of course, all vehicles trapped within the radius of fire had to stop, and the passengers ran across the express to the other side of the road. We ran. We saw men in army camouflage wielding AK-47s run after us and dragged us back to the side we had just fled from. No one escaped. They had seen us run and pursued us until all of us were caught and rounded up. We were then marched in a single file into the bush. As we headed into the bush, they had arranged us in a formation. One victim, one kidnapper, and so on, while the rest of the kidnappers formed two lines beside our single file. There was no escape, as they repeatedly warned us that we would be shot if we tried to escape. We marched on for the full 6 hours in the bush. There were no huts, no buildings, no farmland. Just endless, vast, arid land. I was able to gauge time because I was still wearing my wristwatch, though my phone and bag had been taken by the kidnappers. Same with the rest of the other victims. Like me, who had the misfortune of being on the road at that time. As soon as our phones were taken, the SIMs were removed. This of course meant they didn't want us traced. Our phones were auctioned off to a certain yellow. That was the name of the person on the other end of the line who bargained for our phones. I was in tatters in the course of the 6-hour trek. My gown had ripped open in my attempt to escape. My wig had fallen off, and my tear-stained face caked in dust and dirt. I was the only woman among the victims. There were 35 of us and twice the number of kidnappers. I feared the worst would happen. I began to pray because these people were just smoking weed. They were not normal people. When we stopped, I quickly sought the face of one whom I perceived to be the leader. I went on my knees and crawled at his feet, groveling, weeping agonizingly and pleading. I said to him, I know you are a good Muslim, one versed in the tenets of Islam, who knows the sanctity of marriage. Please protect my honor, for I'm a married woman. Please protect me. This leader, who must have been like 26 years at the most, wouldn't look at my face, and I quickly sensed that he couldn't bear to look at a crying woman, and so I intensified my cries and pleas and groveling. I rolled in the dust with snot running from one side of my nostril to the other. Still, with his gaze averted, he told me to stop crying and join the rest of the victims that were huddled on the ground. When I wouldn't stop, he said sternly that if I didn't stop, he wouldn't help me. So I stopped. He looked at me and told me I wouldn't be touched by anyone's voice. Then they started getting in touch with our people to demand ransom. How did they contact our relatives? First off, they asked us to call out the names and numbers of our relatives, the ones we wanted them to contact for our ransom. Once we gave the numbers, they called them and allowed us to speak to them for a few seconds before they took over the phone and made their demands. They used an old untraceable Nokia phone to make each of these calls, and because they spoke Hausa to us, but Fulani amongst themselves, I wasn't able to catch much of what was being said among them. Being the only woman, I was the first to be asked to introduce myself, name, state of origin, job, how much I had in my bank account, and as they searched every nook and cranny of my bag and wallet, they wondered why I didn't have an ATM card. Fully that day was the day I didn't travel. I told my kidnappers that I had no bank account, that I am a married woman with children who also happens to be a student. I pleaded, telling them my husband is poor and earns 8,500 naira monthly, and that my family is very poor as well. I told them I was given to my husband at a young age to settle a debt my father had incurred. They called me a harlot for leaving my children and going to school. I explained that it was my husband's idea. He wanted me to work to augment his salary, and working required a certificate, and so I had to go to school to earn one. Thankfully, my story was believed. I was soon to realize that these uneducated kidnappers didn't know much. Then they decided I was worth 5 million. Immediately I heard that, I raised my hands in surrender. I said, just shoot me. There's no way my husband or family will ever raise that amount of money. Nobody in my village, Goringoni, the poorest village in Kaduna State, nobody will give you more than 2,000 naira each. So please, just shoot me. The leader then drew me aside and asked me exactly how much my family could get. I said 10,000 naira. He walked away in anger, swearing that I would die. I was still haggling over my ransom when God came through for me. Now there was another victim, a customs officer from Kogi who drew their ire. They discovered his identity from the ID card found in his wallet. It was clear the kidnappers apparently hate the current government because victims who worked for government were singled out and thoroughly beaten with sticks they used to herd cows. They said the government had impoverished its people and that those in government were thieves. Every chance they had, they would beat the customs officer. Despite my situation, I began to think of how to save him. So I called out that he must be a fake customs officer as his service number is 10 digits instead of 6. They stopped, and thankfully, the customs officer killed him. He begged them, saying that indeed he was a fake customs officer. He said he smuggled cars into the country and he had to do a fake ID to deceive the customs officials. Who were collecting money from him. That's how they stopped beating him. They demanded 10 million of the customs officer's family. Then, there was also amongst us the Yoruba man, who by all appearances was quite rich. Since the Yoruba man didn't speak Hausa, I was his interpreter to kidnappers. This Yoruba man jumped into the drainage tunnel when we were first attacked and fled to the bush. But the kidnappers had gone after him and dragged him by the leg out of the tunnel into the open. So he was caked in blood and dirt. This man told me I should tell the kidnappers he was willing to pay any amount they wanted. I had to shush him. I warned him, they will finish you. But the man was jittery. You know how Yoruba people are. At the sign of trouble, at the end of the negotiation, they demanded 100 million from his family. You see, all of us victims were thoroughly stripped of whatever we possessed. I was quick to have deleted my messages and email from my phone when the commotion started. That was my saving grace. So when I didn't even have enough money in my bank account, there was no alert or bank details in my phone. That was how I got lucky. The others were not so lucky. Each victim was asked to give the correct PIN number and amount left in his account. Any attempt to give a fake PIN was instant death upon discovery because they wouldn't ask you again. So how did God come through for me? I was the go-between who always had phone on me so I could interpret when calls came in. One afternoon, they suddenly began to argue among themselves and so moved away from most victims. I found myself alone with the phone. I quickly dialed my brother and told him to keep negotiating, never to give in or accept any amount given to him. I asked that he must keep negotiating. Once a victim speaks to their family, the victim never gets to talk again until ransom is paid, and families don't realize they can haggle and negotiate ransom. After demand for a ransom was made from all families and victims, we began another stretch of traveling. We trekked for another 6 hours, making it a total of 12 hours trek from the express into the deepest part of bush. As we went along, we saw their armed vigilantes. Yes, the kidnappers had vigilantes to catch and kill runaway victims. They told us their vigilantes were well armed, and since it was an open field, any runaway victim will be shot dead. When we got to what was our destination, it was a huge village. Community of different platoons of kidnappers who had their own victims. So it was like a village business. Hundreds of kidnappers living side by side, several hundreds more, with each owning victims they had raided off the roads. When we were eventually settled in an open place, the other platoon of kidnappers came to inspect us like we were spoils of war or loot. They came to us. Suddenly I was being ogled by boys of no less than 16 to 18 years old. They told my kidnappers that I was a good catch. This meant in terms of rape, I heard one of my kidnappers say their leader forbade them from touching me, but that they would see about it. I began to pray that the leader doesn't change his mind about protecting me. Cut a long story short, I was released after a few days, after a ransom of 500,000 was paid on my behalf. And no, my family didn't raise all of that money. My old schoolmates from the Federal Government Girls College Secondary School I attended helped raise money as well. I have God, them, and of course my traumatized family to thank for my release. The customs officer, who was asked to bring 10 million, paid 5 million. They asked our families to meet us at a certain place where their Okada rider looks out, took them on a 2 hours drive into the bush, where they counted them, then asked them to walk back and wait at a certain point for us. I and the custom officer were released together as our ransom was paid the same day. We walked for more than 8 hours to reunite with our families. Home today, but so traumatized. I was happy when Governor El Rufai's convoy went after them time ago, but a more concerted effort is needed. While I was there, an Air Force fighter jet came and hovered over the community of kidnappers. Yes, it means government is aware of their location. As soon as the fighter jet was sighted, the kidnappers assembled all of us victims at the edge of the waterfall and pointed their weapons at us. They were prepared to shoot us if the fighter jet opened fire on them. At this point, we the victims began to wave the fighter jets off. We began to beg them to leave, whereas our kidnappers taunted and dared the fighter jet to drop lower so they could complete the massacre. I found out that victims whose families couldn't raise money were taken to the edge and shot. Their bodies would then fall below and swept away by the water. That way it won't stink out the community. Date? Nobody has come to take my statement, ask me what happened. I mean, the authorities haven't contacted me, so they know exactly what is going on.
If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.